be great.
All right, well, welcome. I'm thrilled to be here with you this afternoon on our first webinar together. My name is Ryan Jennings, and I'm the president and CEO of the Wayne County Community Foundation. I'm joined here with Steve Link from Cornerstone, and we work with Cornerstone on some of our investment portfolios, and we are working with Steve to help build our planned giving program at the Wayne County Community Foundation. So this is one of two webinars that we're hosting in October. This one's really geared towards individuals and talking about planned giving. And then we'll have another one later in the month that's really a deep dive for financial advisors or those of you that are really interested in learning more about tools for planned giving and supporting clients in planned giving. Steve is particularly ready to talk about this conversation and why community foundations are a great tool for planned giving. He served on the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation for 9 years, and we're just thrilled to partner with you on this program.
Happy to be here.
Some basic information about the Community Foundation. The Wayne County Community Foundation is 31 years old and have an asset size that we maintain and manage of about $10 million, which is actively growing. We partner with regional funders, multiple nonprofit organizations in our area, and local government to support nonprofits and build the capacity of the nonprofits in our area. We work with donors directly to establish donor advised funds and scholarship funds, and hold over 125 funds supporting grants and scholarships in and surrounding Wayne County, Pennsylvania. We also hold multiple field of interest funds like a worker crisis fund, first responders fund, and the Wayne Tomorrow Initiative Fund. So a few housekeeping items. This is set up as a webinar. So we can't see you, but you can see us, and it is being recorded. So if you have to step away or want to share this with someone after the recording has finished, we will share that out through our newsletter, and you can certainly have access to that and share it with anyone or watch it again later. Your attendee information is not being shared with the public, so people will not be able to see whether or not you were on this webinar. If you would like to ask any questions, which we highly encourage, you can do so at the bottom of your screen with the question and answer piece. And our colleague Angela will be helping to share those questions with us throughout. So those will be intermingled in this conversation with Steve. So with that, Steve, I think we'll kick it off with a first question that I have for you, which is a will really necessary? That's a basic one, but an important one.
And as a non-lawyer, I am going to give a very lawyerly answer. It depends. So the reality is we all have a will, because any state in which we die, if we don't have a will, the state has a guideline that will direct how our assets are allocated to only blood relatives. So if your parents are surviving, or a spouse, children, each state kind of designates what percentage goes where, depending upon what remaining relatives you have available. Roughly only 65% of Americans are in the situation where they don't have a will. And for some people, they don't have assets and they don't think it matters. But when you start thinking about you have children and who's going to take care of those children if something happens to you, it really does. There are a lot of reasons outside of the financial reasons for making sure that you have a will in place. It is a little concerning that 65% of Americans don't have a will. Even more concerning is even those who have a will haven't reviewed it probably in the last 20 years. And if you count that, it takes the total to about 75% of Americans not having a will. The reality in a 20-year period, and you and I have spoken about this before, Ryan, you get married and you might write your first will. You have a child, you might update your will because you're thinking about who's going to care for this being if something happens and we're not here. What then happens is you get just totally wrapped up in taking care of children and your career, and all of a sudden you look up and 20 years have gone by, and this child for whom you have appointed, somebody to step in, no longer really needs that. And then you may or may not take the step of going, oh my gosh, and my assets are a lot different, and I need to update this. So most people, there is a gap of time while their kids are growing that they don't go back and revisit it. It's really smart to revisit it, even if it's just to read it and know what has changed in your life, so that you can affect changes on how your assets are titled or who you've designated as beneficiaries, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But it is really important to have one. And I confess, even as the cobbler, there was a period of time where I had a gap. I recently re-updated my will, and part of that was motivated by the fact that my father passed away, and then 3 months later, my 65-year-old brother passed away, and that was the alarm bell. And for many people, that's what happens. They lose a family member, and all of a sudden they're like, "Ooh, I really should get this done."
Sure. Yeah, no, I think the past couple of years of collectively living through a pandemic and global conflict and multiple challenging things happening all at once collectively has spurred more people to start thinking about their estate planning. And we have a lawyer office across the hall from our office, and we see a lot of people coming in and out and updating their will. And so that's an important step, but it's not always a fun one that you think, oh, today I'm going to update my will, but it's an important one that we think about doing on a fairly regular basis.
It's a good way to be able to sleep well at night, to know that you've
Sure.
taken care of this. But yes, it's really important to get it done. I had another thing I was going to say, and it skipped out of my mind, but if it comes back, I'll mention it.
Perfect.
And Steve and Ryan, if I could jump in real quick, we did have our first question that came through.
Sure.
It said, I have a child that does not have the capacity or inclination to manage their inheritance that I want to leave them. How do I help them without having them feel that I don't trust them?
Oh, that's a really great question. And it's actually one I've been asked a lot over the 30 years of working with donors to various universities. It's another kind of depends answer. There are different ways of doing it based on what kind of assets you have, who you would like to administer it. You can do everything from a charitable trust that will take care of them for their lifetime and then pour over to charity. You can simply have it in a special needs trust. There's a philosophical discussion you need to have with yourself, and if you have a spouse, with your spouse, about having this conversation with that offspring or other relative that you're going to leave these funds for the benefit of, so that they're not getting this in a vacuum of a legal document that just describes what they're getting as financial assistance. A verbal conversation, or if you're not comfortable doing that, I would encourage you, and I think your legal advisor would probably encourage you, to write a letter explaining why you have taken the step of putting it in to some kind of vehicle as being for their protection, that you're doing this out of love for them. It's not, I wouldn't say it's not because I don't trust you, but just to coach it in loving terms, that we're doing this because we want to make sure that there are always resources there to help you, not in a punitive kind of way. It's so easy for us as human beings to see something and read into it. And if we're gone, there's really no opportunity for the people we're benefiting to ask those questions. So they're left to wonder, unless you've written them a letter or you've sat down with them in advance to say, hey, I've thought long and hard about this. I think this is the best way to be helpful. So that's kind of my quick answer. I don't know, Ryan, if you have a different reflection on that.
I think that's a great answer. And it's something that I can kind of relate to also, how some donors choose to leave money in an endowment fund rather than give a lump sum to a nonprofit that they care about. It's not necessarily out of trust, although that might be a piece of it, but it's also just the focus on sustainable funding rather than just one lump sum all at once that might not be the intention of the donor. So a similar scenario of caring for someone long term is the priority of the donor, of what they want to see done with that money. So expressing that in a way that this is how I want this asset to be used, is to care for you over time.
And actually listening to you say that reminds me of the point I wanted to make a minute ago. The state laws will only, if you don't have a will only designate for living beneficiaries. They will not provide for any charitable intent. So if you have charitable intent, it's doubly important that you put it into the legal form of a will or into beneficiary designations, because otherwise it will not happen.
Interesting. So yeah, it doesn't allow for philanthropy in that sense. It only goes to heirs or
Yep.
family members. Wonderful. So how would you say, Steve, that most people go about planning and doing estate planning? I know that it happens over time and not it's not just kind of check one box, but how do you see most people going about this planning?
I would say people kind of go two routes. One is they talk with their friends and they go to professional advisors. And sometimes, usually talking with their friends will involve some version of, well, this is how I did it, and I'd be happy to introduce you to my professional advisor, or do you want the name of that professional advisor? Or, they might get an unhappy story of, like, I went to a professional advisor, but I never actually ended up signing the will. I didn't really like how it went, kind of thing. So it's important to do your research. Most attorneys, estate attorneys, will sit down and have a complimentary meeting with you to kind of let you know how the process works, what you should have prepared when you come to meet with them. The other thing, if you have a financial advisor, you could ask your financial advisor for recommendations. Most professionals will be reluctant to give outright recommendations for other advisors because there's a legal liability, or they may perceive a legal liability. So the onus is really on us as individuals to research, who have friends that we respect, admire, trust, used for their legal documents, and to what extent are they happy with those relationships? So in some cases, if you have someone who has lost a spouse and gone through the whole process, not just the preparation of the document, but the settlement of the estate, that I think is the ultimate endorsement for somebody, if they are happy at the end of that. And I can tell you from settling my own dad's estate, that as much as we deeply liked the attorney he was working with for decades, as we got close to the end of his life, we realized that this advisor had missed some kind of big things, and we were scrambling at the end to get things in place so that New York State did not become a seventh sibling to share our father's estate. So being able to talk with someone who has gone through the experience of settling a spouse's estate or another family member's estate is a great affirmation that the attorney they used was a great attorney. The other side of this challenge is you want to make sure you're working with advisors who are hopefully younger than you, so that they're going to be around when you're not, to actually do the settlement. And then maybe you start with, if you're on the younger side, you start with an older attorney who's more experienced, and then over time you gradually find an estate attorney relationship, professional advisor relationship that is roughly your age. And then as you get towards 70, you're trying to identify a younger estate attorney who will be there at the end to help your spouse, your surviving spouse, or to help your children or whomever is going to be your executor.
Sure. No, those are all really important pieces to keep in mind. And just one thing to note, that community foundations can be a really important tool that if as you're planning your will, you're not really sure where to leave money. The nonprofits, you might do a will and you're like, well, I don't know what the community is going to look like, or if this nonprofit will be around, or things like that. The community foundations in our community or communities across the country are a great tool to be able to leave money for charitable gifts to nonprofits that you can leave as arts and culture or animal welfare. You can kind of leave in buckets, and then nonprofits that are addressing that the community foundation can support over time, or we can be kind of that one-stop shop. So you don't have to, in your will, put each nonprofit separately. You can give the funds to the community foundation, and we can do that distribution on your behalf over time. So we're a helpful resource that's what we're here for, to really connect donors with the nonprofits that they care about.
And if I can offer a personal testimony to this.
Sure, please do.
Testimonial. In redoing my estate plans, I have charitable organizations that I care deeply about, but I'm not entirely sure about their long-term financial viability or leadership. And so I have chosen the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation to be the recipient of a chunk of money that can then be allocated out with cascading language that if this couple of, I will call them smaller entities, aren't sustainable, that the community foundation, with their knowledge of the local need, can then in those categories of history preservation and arts and culture, look at what are the other organizations that are out there that are most similarly aligned with what I was trying to do with the designated organizations. And I, yeah, I guess, yes, you are paying me because I'm with Cornerstone, but this is a really unpaid advertisement for the strength of community foundations in knowing the needs of the local community, not just today, but 50 years down the road when I'm not here and you're not here, Ryan, that there will be somebody sitting in your seat who is in touch with the community, who can identify where the greatest needs are, and also what are the great assets, what are the great treasures of the community that need to be preserved by financial support.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we're in the market of sustainability for the long haul. So I appreciate that.
Steve, I'm sorry, Ryan.
Go ahead.
Sure. No, a question that hopefully Steve can weigh in on. This says, my spouse and I have differing thoughts on what to leave our children and what to leave for the community. What suggestions can you offer?
This is another very frequent conversation, and some of it depends on how individual spouses, what they saw in the households that they grew up in. Was philanthropy part of the household? Was it not something that was done? Was it only after everything else was taken care of? There are a lot of ways to address this. So it is worth having a conversation. I will say in my own parents' case, I think they came to a detente where they had differing opinions on what to do, because we have some family members who have, I will just call it specific needs, and other family members that had no need. And so that becomes a little bit of a wrestling match. And hopefully by talking with your professional advisors and maybe even talking with a counselor, you can kind of find a middle ground. In some cases, the detente is that they wait until the first spouse passes away and then the second spouse makes the decision. That's one way to do it. I personally don't think that's the optimal way. I think it's better that everybody is here and can be involved in the conversation, and then you come up with an agreed upon plan. So my overall recommendation is to keep everything in percentage terms. We never know whether the market for real estate or our stock investments is going to be up or down at the point that somebody passes away. So if you keep the percentage that you want to go all to charity or family in percentage terms, they will stay on par. So if the estate shrinks all of a sudden, you don't have a situation where all of a sudden, because you named a specific percentage for charity, a specific dollar for charity, now your family is left with very little. If you keep everything in percentage terms, as the estate grows, both relative pools will grow. If the estate suddenly drops, both of the pools will drop and everything will be kept in proportion to one another. The question has been raised by a lot of people about, is it best to give just enough to be helpful without giving enough to be harmful? And I think that's a struggle question on what that dollar figure is. And each family, I think, will have a different thought on that. I hope that answers the question. If it hasn't fully, by all means, send another question through on the chat, and I'll take another stab at it. I see we've lost Ryan for a second, and I'm not quite sure if she's had an internet interruption on her end. Angela, can you confirm?
Yes, it looks like she's still here. It must be an internet connection.
I am here, but it's raining, so we have unstable internet in northeastern Pennsylvania. So my apologies.
We're very flexible. We'll keep right on going.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad the Lehigh Valley has a stronger internet connection. Yeah, I will come back when it says that I'm stable, but for now you get to see a still picture of my face. Well, thank you for that. I think that piece about leaving the percentages in a will is a really important one. As we all know, things change over time, and that leaves the flexibility and scalability of that gift right in the writing. So that's really helpful.
Ryan, could I add one more thing to that?
Sure, please do.
And that's to make sure when you're doing the will that you're looking at all of your assets and the beneficiary designations, because the beneficiary designations on life insurance, on retirement plan assets, on bank accounts will all trump whatever is in your will. It's not like you can pull it back into you shouldn't pull it back into your estate. So in the case that you have a very large tax deferred retirement account and you've named X individual or X individual and charities as beneficiaries, that's going to happen regardless of whether you say give 50% of my estate to X individual and 50% to another individual. So it's important to really kind of make a list of all of your assets, what the relative values are, total value, and then think about prioritization. Who are your highest priority individuals and organizations, and make sure that your titling and beneficiary designations match up with what you're trying to do in your actual will document.
Wonderful. That's very helpful, Steve. So my next question is, what are the most common vehicles, and this kind of, you led into this, what are some of the most common vehicles that individuals use to accomplish their philanthropic goals?
So the bequest, 80% of planned gifts to charities come in the form of bequests. Most people use a bequest because it's at the end. It's after they've taken care of themselves, and if they're married, taking care of their spouse. It's a very simple thing, and it's easy to do that percentage terms. I want, my parents used an even split between each of my 5 siblings and me, and that was their way as Depression era children of saying, we love you all equally, regardless of what your current need is or what your current assets are. That's how we're doing it. And I actually tried to encourage my dad not to include me, so that those who had greater need would have more resources available. And he just, and I recognize this is his decision. And for each individual listening today, this is your decision. But in my mind, it would have been more helpful to assist the siblings that needed additional assistance. In addition, you have beneficiary designation forms. If you have a brokerage account, you can designate a specific individual or individuals to receive ownership of your stock account at your death. I will not get into it now, but they will get a step up in basis in the value of those assets if they have appreciated without any taxation on it. Life insurance beneficiary designation form. You can do the same with stock accounts. Apologies. I am getting over COVID and still have a cough. Anything additional on that you'd like me to cover, Ryan?
And Ryan, if not, there is a question that came through that might be able to stir some conversations as well. This participant had asked, my thoughts on charitable giving continue to evolve, and I don't want to pay to revise my will every time my thinking shifts on which organizations I want to benefit and for how much. Is there any way around this? Any thoughts?
Absolutely. So This, and I'm sorry to see we've now lost Ryan to the internet, but this is really where the community foundations are excellent. I think, oh my gosh, I just had a mental, would you repeat the question again?
Sure. It says, my thoughts on charitable giving continue to evolve, and I don't want to pay to revise my will every time my thinking shifts on which organizations I want to benefit and for how much. Is there any way around this?
Yes. So typically a community foundation, you can set up a fund with a designation for how you want the funds to be used that you are leaving to them. You don't have to change your will. You just say in your will, I want X percentage of my estate to go to the community foundation to be used as directed in my most recent agreement. And then you can work with your community foundation over time. And if you decide you no longer want to support a specific organization, or you want to add additional organizations, you can revise that agreement without having to update your will. Excuse me. I hope that answered the question. If it hasn't, by all means, please send back another question through the chat, and I'll take another stab. Ryan, do we have you?
If not, Steve, do you mind if I jump in and I can? Oh, are you there, Ryan?
I am kind of here. The wind blows and then things get unstable around here, but thank you for answering that question. Angela, if you had any other questions to pipe in, please do.
I not at this point, but if you're ready to jump back in, that's wonderful.
Thank you for taking the baton as I keep getting kicked. It's honestly, as soon as the wind blows, then everything gets kicked off.
No problem.
My apologies. So I would love to ask the question, what are some examples of disproportionate assets that you could talk about, Steve?
Okay, so this, I mentioned a minute ago about the tax-deferred retirement plan assets potentially being the largest thing in somebody's estate. You can have a vacation home, which is just skyrocketed in value, but you may not want to necessarily leave that to heirs, or if you do leave it to heirs, you're trying to figure out, how do I split this in an equitable way or not burden them with ongoing maintenance or operation costs. Another vehicle you can use with a community foundation or with a commercial entity is a charitable remainder trust, and you can place this highly appreciated asset, whether it's a single stock and you want to be able to diversify out of it but don't want to lose 20% to capital gains or more, you can place it in a charitable remainder trust. The trust is a tax-exempt entity, and it can liquidate without paying capital gain on it, and then you are being paid out a distribution from that, excuse me, with 100% of your assets or proceeds from that item working for you. Excuse me. Mineral rights are another. Raw land, a single stock, like I mentioned a moment ago, or a closely held company. So you're the second generation, third generation, or you created this company, and now you're looking at, I may or may not have children or other family members who want to step in and run the company. How do I extract my value out of this to the heirs that I want to benefit, whether that's individuals or charities, in a way that allows the organization to continue to thrive, to employ the employees that I've brought and trusted and helped me build this company. And there are a variety of ways to do that. And I don't know that this is the time and place to do that, but if there are people who are participating today who would like to go into more detail, I'm happy to do that. There are ways to transfer stock to charity and then have the company buy it back, which will automatically increase the percentage ownership of the other stockholders. There are ways, there are a lot of ways if you have a small business to look at that are innovative and can help you transfer funds value to next generation or charities without having a large tax bite.
I think a message I'm really hearing throughout all of this is that there's not a one size fits all for solution or approach for this. I often get the question of, well, what do most people do? Or what does everyone do? And I'm like, there isn't a most or an everyone in this. Each donor advised fund that we have, each scholarship fund, each bequest that we get is really unique to the individual, which can be kind of daunting to think about. What you have to really drill into what you as an individual want to leave your legacy and how you want to leave that. So that's the hard work that the donor unfortunately has to do to make those decisions for him or herself. So
but you will help, as a community foundation, you'll help them think through that. You'll give them questions, and they may ask, well, what are the options? And that's really where it's the big picture question: what impact do you want to have? And then the smaller detail questions of, well, how do I get to that? What's the most effective way to do that?
Yeah, because you have options of whether or not a fund or distributions are over a long period of time, or you're making an impact all at once. So we have definitely different ways to be able to distribute those funds all at once, over a short period of time, over a long period of time. So we are flexible in that. Every donation made to a community foundation does not need to be endowed in perpetuity. It can be, if that's the approach the donor wants to go in, but just like we're all unique, there are definitely there's a lot of diversity in how people want to distribute their bequests or dollars.
And certainly if it's an immediate need kind of thing that somebody wants to have an impact on, they may not even want to wait for the estate. They may prefer to make an outright gift now to mitigate a problem that's building that they see in the community, as opposed to, wait 20 years. And now the problem's gotten much bigger and much more expensive to address.
Sure. And that's a different philosophy that donors have. Some people historically have wanted to give after they're gone. And my approach is really to encourage both and to not deprive a donor of the gratification and joy that comes from giving. Research really shows that giving increases oxytocin in the brain, the happiness hormone, and endorphins. And you want to be able to enjoy that while you're living and see the positive impacts if you're able. Each person's scenario is a little different.
And this may sound like a negative, but I will add this to the equation. If you're trying to do something that may be innovative in approaching an issue or something that you want to have impact on, being able to test it during your lifetime to see if it's having the impact that you thought it was going to have allows you to pivot if you find out it's not succeeding the way you thought it was.
Sure.
If you're not happy with that, you can then either modify it and try at a different basis, or completely change direction.
Yeah, and it's a way to also see what the relationship is like with the nonprofit that you're interested in supporting. See if the trust can be built in, and that's a relationship that you value over time and want to invest more in. So I appreciate that as well.
Great.
So what are some of the next steps that individuals should take, or that you'd recommend to take? These are not kind of one conversation, one action that has to happen. It's over time. So where is the starting point for a donor?
Get a pad of paper and a pen, and really keep this someplace that you can go back and keep adding to it. You're absolutely right. This is an iterative process. You'll probably write something down and come back in a couple of months and go, you know what? I thought that was what I want to do, but I want to tweak this. So a couple of things: really start assembling in one place a list of all your assets, because that's the first question your attorney will probably ask you is, well, let's talk about the totality of your estate so we understand conceptually what we're working with and what makes sense and what might not make sense. I would make a list of the individuals and organizations that are important to you. And once you feel like you've gotten most of that in place, I would go back through that list and prioritize it. What percentage would you want to go to living individuals? What percentage would you want to go to organizations? And then within that, which individuals or which organizations are most important to you in terms of providing resources, because all of that will help your professional advisor put together your documents in a more rapid and, as a result, a less expensive way, because they're not having to ask you individual questions about this. Start assembling the tax basis in each of those assets. So yes, there's the current market value, but your executor will need to know how much you paid for things like your house, like a vacation home, like your stocks, because, and depending on when you bought your stocks, that may all be in your brokerage account and readily accessible, but it really saves a lot of time. If you have stock certificates, as my father did, you really want to get those into street named. It is a huge challenge to get that converted from certificate form to any kind of electronic means for your executor to process and then distribute out to your heirs. I am very grateful that our father allowed us to help him get that into street name before he passed, because it just made our job tremendously easier. Let's see.
Just one thing on stock transfers that can be beneficial for a community foundation to be a partner in this is that if that is an asset or one of the assets that you're thinking about distributing to someone other than to an organization rather than a family member, what's powerful about a community foundation is we can accept that gift of stock as a full donation. So it doesn't have to be liquidated and the taxes don't have to be paid on the gains for that, where when it's donated or given to a family member, there's sometimes some tax implications depending on the amount of the stock and whatnot. So we can be a helpful tool in that way to be able to transfer the stock. Some smaller nonprofits might not have the capacity to do that. So they might need that liquidated first, and that can sometimes have tax implications.
That's a really excellent point. Two pieces to that. If you are giving during your lifetime, definitely give the appreciated stock to charity as opposed to individuals. If you're giving at death, individuals get a step up in basis, so there is no tax. But the counter to that is your tax deferred retirement plan assets now become the vehicle to give to charity, because charity will not pay income tax on those tax deferred dollars, whereas your heirs will, and will lose up to 60 or 70 cents on every dollar, where you could put 100% of those assets to work in charity. So part of this conversation is about what is the right thing to give during life, and what are the most tax advantaged things to give to individuals versus organizations at death. And
correct. Yeah, there's not a one size fits. Not all assets are created equal as far as their tax implications and what can and cannot be given without any tax implication. So I think that your financial advisors are part of an important team to help share that knowledge as you're exploring what your goals are and how you want to leave your legacy. And we at the Community Foundation are happy to be part of that team as well, so that we can share what resources we have available to make that possible.
Great. Other items, and I do have a list up here, so I'm looking a little over the top of the laptop to make sure I don't forget anything. I think that I would close with interview your professional advisors. Most are willing to meet without an initial charge. Make sure it's a good connection for you. And to my earlier point, talk with your friends. You know, who are the advisors that they have worked with? Have they gone through all of the steps, not only of the planning, but then the execution? And would they recommend that person to you? So those are kind of the questions I have. Angela, are there any other questions from the chat?
Yes, there's one question that just came through. This is asking, I'm not sure which one of you will be best to answer, but it said, I would like to encourage my children and my grandchildren to think more charitably about our community. How can the Community Foundation help me with that?
That's a great question. And I think philanthropy and just that word can be kind of cumbersome and overwhelming. And I think historically philanthropists there was a term that was given to people that gave multiple millions of dollars. But I think that encouraging philanthropy at every level and giving at every level is a really important culture shift that happens within an individual family. So that starts at home and encouraging to give back to your community in any way that you can. We can certainly establish family funds at the community foundation so that the whole family can be encouraged to participate in giving to that fund and then identifying causes and charities that they're interested in supporting. So that can be a whole family effort. We also have lots of different funds that support things like trail building and emergency food relief and other things that might really trigger an interest in younger generations of supporting things that they care about. And then at the Community Foundation, we also have a youth advisory committee. So for high school students in Wayne County, they can participate in a committee that selects mini grants to give out to youth programs in Wayne County. So we're working to try to build that ecosystem of philanthropy and recognize that it's really everyone has a part to play in giving back. And we all need charity at some point in our lives as well. I'm sure that we've all been touched by charitable gifts, whether that's a scholarship or food relief or emergency crisis things, Red Cross, et cetera. We all will need charity at some point on this earth at some point in our journey. So kind of thinking about that as an ecosystem that we're paying into, and at some point we'll receive benefit from that as well. And so we're always happy to have that conversation with families at any point. Steve, you have anything to add about that?
You covered the waterfront. When the question got asked, I was thinking about donor advised funds and what a great tool they are for multi-generational education. And not only that, but bringing families together. So I think one of the concerns of senior generations frequently is that when we pass, each of our offspring are going to take their share and disappear if they're not really close with their siblings. And one way I've seen families address this is by setting up these donor advised funds and then coming together as a family where each individual has a pool of money that they can direct individually without agreement from everybody else. But then there's a central pot of money where everybody brings ideas, and it may be a topic each year, like something they want to work on as a family, but they bring their thinking to the table, and it gives the more experienced members of the family an opportunity to kind of coach those who may have less experience doing this, to help them build their confidence and their knowledge and how to assess, is this a good use of charitable dollars? Are we having an impact? How do we assess whether we're having an impact? I was just at the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation Board of Advisors meeting Wednesday morning, and we had this big conversation about, we frequently as donors give to people who look like us. If there are needs in the community by people who don't look like us, how do we give, and is the way that we're giving effective? Or are we basically forcing them to use a lot of what we're making as a grant simply to answer our questions, to assemble information that we could get on our own if we just went out and did the research online, to look at their budget, to look at their dollars, to look at their last Form 990, without making a grassroots organization go through all of this paperwork to do it. So I think it's a great educational vehicle to use philanthropy to pull the family together, because in a way, the asset's already been given away. So there isn't the same level of self-interest. Now you're bringing a family together to think about what they want their legacy to be, how they want to have impact. And yes, they can certainly have disagreement, but disagreement can be a good learning tool for why I don't think that grant is going to be as powerful as this grant. And that becomes a family classroom, if you want to call it that.
Yeah, no, I love that. And we are more than happy to be part of that journey with any family. We do have some family funds that have scholarship funds or grant making, and they work collectively as a family or committee to determine how those dollars are spent in our community. And I know that many of them are made in memory of a deceased loved one. And so that's a nice way to also keep the legacy of that individual alive. But for families that just want to create a more of a culture of philanthropy within their own family, we can certainly provide that conduit.
And I guess it doesn't actually have to be a family member. If you're someone who doesn't have children, but you have friends that you love, that you trust, that you would want to maybe step in and offer some guidance, I guess you could. Can you do that? Can you name a non-blood relative?
Sure, certainly. Yeah, most certainly. For us, we certainly can do that.
Great.
Wonderful.
Are there any other questions, Angela?
That looks to be all the questions that have come through. Thank you both very much.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate your patience, as technology isn't always a friend of ours and cooperative, but I'm glad to have started and finished smoothly. And thank you for your time, Steve. I think this was a great conversation and one that we hope to share with our community for weeks ahead, so people can learn more. And I look forward to continuing to work with you to build out our planned giving program. So again, we have another webinar happening predominantly for financial advisors or legal advisors, but anyone who's interested in a deep dive is also welcome. That information is in our newsletter, or you can contact me at the foundation at rjennings@waynefoundation.org for more information. So I just want to thank Angela and Steve for your time, and stay tuned for more information from the Wayne County Community Foundation.
And I'm always happy to chat if somebody wants to have a sidebar conversation with the two of us together or individually.
Wonderful.
My goal is to impart knowledge at this point in my career, and it's a joy to help people think about what they want to do.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Steve. Stay well, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.